Alrighty, so recently, Spitfire announced their DC's Stargirl scoring competition, and I'm super excited for this because it will be judged by one of my all-time favorite composers, Pinar Toprak. Pinar is the incredible composer behind Stargirl, Captain Marvel, Us Again, and, well, even Fortnite. I cannot recommend her music enough, and if you're interested in learning more about her, I highly recommend Disney's podcast, Four Scores. Their episode with her is how I was introduced to her body of work, and is my favorite episode in the entire podcast series. Now, on their website, Spitfire clearly states that each submitted score will be graded on 3 criteria. 1. How well the score fits the visuals. 2. The individuality of the score. And 3. How you can handle the emotional content in the scene. Like I said, I am really excited for this. So I thought that I would release a video on just how to meet these criteria for anyone who wants to enter the competition, or really for anyone that just wants to score other movie scenes in the future. In this video, we're going to learn how to spot a scene for music. Spotting is the process of preparing a video for music by deciding where music should go, what it should sound like, and just generally what kind of role you want it to play in the film. Throughout this video, we're going to dissect a clip together and discuss what you should be looking for, what you should be considering, and how it all works together to inform the kind of music that you should compose. By the time we're done, you'll know how to carefully spot a scene and prepare a meticulously planned set of notes that will guide your decisions as you write your score. As a quick disclaimer, this video will, by necessity, require a decent foundation in music theory. At least enough to feel confident writing a score for this competition, or others like it. So, if you come across any terms you don't understand, please take note of them and try looking them up later on your own so you can learn something new. This strategy has worked wonders for me in the past, and I'm sure it can help you too. So, with that, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a long video. Get ready to take some notes because without further ado, let's get started. So, first things first, we need to watch the clip that we plan to score. Here I have a clip taken from the short film Danny and the Wild Bunch. The full film was made available for the 2019 International Film Music Competition, so the clip has actually already had its original score removed, which is perfect for us. Now, the first time you watch any clip, I highly recommend that you push any other thoughts of music, scoring, or any other related ideas out of your head. Instead, focus on just experiencing the clip like a normal member of the audience. I mean, after all, a good score shouldn't really grab attention away from the story. Unless the theater has a bunch of music nerds like you and me in the audience, but we tend to be the exception. So, with all of that in mind, let's watch the clip.
Yeah, I know, Mom. Yeah, no, I'm fine. Really, I'm good. This is all part of the process, you know? It just takes 99 no's to get 1 yes. I think it's like the same thing that they always say. Thanks, but no thanks. You know, kids' books these days have to be more cynical, darker. Yeah. Thanks, Mom. Love you.
Miranda! Bullseye! What do you mean darker?
Danny, I think we just have to face facts. Yang is out and yin is in.
Yeah, but the Wild Bunch aren't dark. They're just not like that.
Well, maybe they need to be.
Ooh, what it needs is a good old-fashioned, a Wild West shootout, or a swashbuckling adventure on the high seas. Wait, or a voyage to the far reaches of space!
I write the words. You're the pictures, remember?
The Wild Bunch aren't gonna like this.
So that's it. I won't show the full clip again because I don't want this video taken down with a copyright strike. But whenever you're working on a project, I recommend watching the clip a few times before you really start to analyze it. Make sure you have a good grasp on what the film is about before you try to plan any music. Once you feel confident that you've watched the clip enough times, it's finally time to get started with spotting it. So, our first step is to process our first impressions of the clip. We want to take a look at the scene as a whole before we start getting more specific about different moments in the clip. For this, I have a number of questions that I like to ask myself. 1. What are the primary emotions of this scene? 2. What is the general energy level for this scene? 3. Is there dialogue or any important sound effects in this scene? 4. What about the contour? Are there important shifts in this scene? And 5. What does the music need to do? Let's go through these questions and answer each of them together. Question number 1, what are the primary emotions of this scene? So, if you remember, the scene starts out with the main character, Miranda, talking on the phone with her mom. From the dialogue, we learn that she's an aspiring children's author, but her book has unfortunately once again been turned down by a potential publishing company. This part of the scene is pretty sad, but the character is staying optimistic about her chances, saying, "This is all part of the process." Next, we're introduced to the character of Danny. He tries to cheer up Miranda by making funny suggestions for how to get the story published. This part of the scene is fun and comical, but still has some ominous foreshadowing when Miranda mentions that she might have to make her story darker in order to get it to sell. The scene ends with Miranda chastising Danny, and him ominously replying, "The Wild Bunch aren't gonna like this." This part of the scene is darker than anything we've seen so far, and sets the stage for the scary nature that will dominate the rest of the film. So, now that we have our primary emotions, let's take a look at the energy level. In his incredible book, Creative Strategies in Film Scoring, Ben Newhouse defines energy level as the amount of musical and visual activity in the film. Now, I can't recommend this book enough, so if you're interested, I'll include a link to it in the description of this video. Basically, the idea here is that you want to find out how much visual energy a particular scene has so that you can make an informed decision on how much energy you want your music to have. In his book, Newhouse provides a tool for determining the visual energy of a scene. The tool consists of 5 questions, each one answered with a scale of 1 to 5. How much movement is there in on-screen characters and objects? 1 being none, and 5 being a great deal. How frequently do picture cuts occur? 1 being rarely, and 5 being frequently. What type of picture cuts are used? 1 being slow crossfades, and 5 being hard, instantaneous cuts. 4. Does the vantage point of the camera change via zooming or panning? 1 being no, and 5 being frequently. Finally, is the camera itself moving? 1 is no, and 5 is quickly. Don't worry about being super accurate with each question. You just want to give your honest opinion. There's no objective scale that we're working with here. The main idea is to just give yourself a quick reference point that you can use. Once you've answered each question, find the average by adding all the numbers together and dividing them by 5. This gives you the energy level for the scene. Let's see how this would work for our scene. So the scene starts out without a lot of movement. Miranda is just sitting on her couch, flipping through her book. There's a lot more movement once Danny gets on screen and starts fooling around, but all in all, I'd give this scene about a 3. There's not a ton of energy, but they're not exactly just sitting around and talking the entire time. Number 2, I counted 15 cuts in the full scene. That averages out to a cut every 6 seconds or so, but most of them occur while Danny is on screen. So there were much fewer in the beginning than there were towards the middle and end. So once again, I'm going to give this one a 3. Each of these cuts were pretty hard or instantaneous, so I'll give this one a 4. The camera slowly zooms in and out at different points in this scene, so this one I'll also give a 4. Finally, the camera itself doesn't move while filming during this scene, so this one gets an automatic 1. If we add all of these together, we get a total score of 15. And if we divide that by 5, we get a general energy level of 3 for this entire scene, which is what I would call a moderate energy level. So now we have our primary emotions and our general energy level. So next, let's analyze our scene for dialogue and sound effects. This step is particularly important. Music, dialogue, and sound effects each combine to form the entirety of the sonic element of a film. The tricky part is that only one can be in the foreground at a time, and by foreground, I'm referring to the sound that we want the audience to give the most attention to. As a general rule, dialogue is king. If characters are speaking, the music and sound effects should not drown them out. If there's no dialogue, then the sound effects are next in line for the throne. Well, only if they fit one or more of these categories. Are they unexpected? Do they provide new information to the audience? Are they associated with a main idea in the plot? For example, if we were to have a sudden clap of thunder in the film after Danny says, "The Wild Bunch aren't going to like this," that would be in the foreground because 1, there's no dialogue during the thunderclap, and 2, it would be unexpected and surprising, so we wouldn't want the music to cover it up. Likewise, if we were to hear a door open off screen at any point when no one is talking, that would be in the foreground, because it would tell us that something is happening off screen and could even be important to the plot of the story. If the music isn't mindful of this sound, it could be easily covered up and the audience could get lost. Now, if there's no dialogue, and if there are no important sound effects, then and only then does the music take the foreground as the most important sound you want the audience to pay attention to. However, most of the time you're going to need to focus on keeping the music from drawing too much attention to itself. There are a ton of strategies that you can use to accomplish this, but here are a few of the most common ones. For now, all we need to do is ask, what's in the foreground of this scene? The answer? Dialogue, of course. There is a lot of dialogue in this scene. Whether Miranda is talking on her phone or with Danny, there is almost always someone talking. This means that we need to make sure our music doesn't drown it out. We'll go into more detail on that in a bit, but for now, let's continue with the next question of our first impressions. Since we've covered our primary emotions, general energy level, and sonic foreground, we now want to consider the contour. Are there any important shifts in this scene? Once more, let us reference Mr. Newhouse. Contour is defined as any time the audience is given new information that results in A, a new emotional experience, B, a new energy level, and or C, pondering a new plot circumstance. Or, as I like to think of it, the moments where you would think, wait, but that means... So, if you take nothing else from this video, I would say that understanding contour is the most important part of scoring a film. It's what makes movie soundtracks so unique, and what separates music that was specifically written for a movie from just any random royalty-free music that you could download off the internet. These shifts in contour are important because these are the moments in the scene where you can make a shift in the music and have it make sense. These moments where a shift in the contour is matched by a change in the music are called hit points, or just hits for short. It's super important to make sure that you don't get carried away with assigning hit points in your scoring projects. If the music shifts around too frequently, it's going to take over your sonic foreground and become very distracting very quickly. So let's take a quick look at what moments in our clip I thought warranted a shift in contour. The first shift in contour is at the 31-second marker, when Danny shouts out, "Miranda!" Prior to this moment, the scene is setting us up to feel bad that Miranda's book has been turned down by yet another publishing company. When Danny calls her name, it introduces us to a new plot point by making us think, wait, who's talking? I'm also going to make the argument that our next shift in contour is 10 seconds later, when we see Danny for the first time. Because that's when the energy and emotion take a turn for the better. The final shift doesn't take place until the 1 minute and 14 seconds marker, when Miranda chastises Danny. Here, both the energy and the emotions of the scene take a hit and move down. As a final word of caution, it would have been very easy to overdo it with the number of contour shifts in this scene. For example, you could try and hit each and every costume change that Danny undergoes. However, this would bring a lot of attention to the music and could even distract from the important dialogue. And this is why you want to make sure that you're able to justify every shift in contour using at least one of the 3 prerequisites that we've established. We'll come back to the sync points in a bit, but first let's discuss our last big picture question and discuss the function of the music. Here, I want to ask myself, what does my music need to accomplish to be successful at its job by the end of the scene? I also want to ask, what kind of compositional structure would work best with this scene? So, keeping things simple, I'm going to say that in order for my music to accomplish its role in this scene, I want it to underline and enhance the audience's emotional experience of the scene. Since we're working with such a short clip, there's not really much else that we can expect our music to accomplish. However, if this were a longer film, I might consider making sure that I connect characters with specific ideas using motifs or themes found elsewhere in the film, or that I foreshadow future events and reveals, or, really anything else that the music could be used for. I'm also going to say that in this scene, I'm going to try and use a combination of melody, harmony, countermelody, and a bass line to accomplish this job. In other scenes, I might consider just a melody or some atmospheric drones, really any kind of musical structure that I think would help tell the story best. But for now, we've answered all of our big picture questions to help understand our first impressions of the scene. Now that we've accomplished this, it's time to move on to step 2, where we start to get more specific. So, in part 1, we focused on our first impressions, making sure to understand the big picture of what we want to accomplish with our music. Now, it's time to think of how we're actually going to accomplish it. First things first, let's take a look at what music we need to write. So we've separated our scene using 3 shifts in contour. This splits the scene into 4 distinct sections that we want to write music for. At this stage, we're going to address a series of questions for each section of the clip. 1, what emotions are we working with? 2, what energy level are we working with? 3, what's in the sonic foreground? And 4, what do our 9 parameters of music look like? The first 3 questions are pretty self-explanatory. Let's look at them for the first section. For the first question, this is the sad part of the scene. I want to make sure to capture the overall bummer vibes while also hinting at the kind of fantastic nature of the story, as well as a tiny hint of the optimism. For the second question, following the same strategy as earlier, I found that the general energy level of this section to actually be about 1.4 out of 5, which is less than half of what the energy level is for the scene as a whole. Since this section has such low visual energy, it makes sense that our music should also have low energy. And number 3, there's a lot of important dialogue in the scene, so the music must stay in the background. Otherwise, the audience will miss a bunch of important information. And that's about it for the easy questions. Now we have to address good old number 4. This is where we stop thinking about what does our music need to do and start focusing on how the heck we're actually going to do it. So personally, I like to divide music into 9 basic parameters: tempo, texture, timbre, rhythm, register, dynamics, articulation, pitch, and harmony. In a bit, we're going to take a look at each and every one of these aspects and figure out just how can we use them to accomplish our tasks. But first, let's backtrack just a moment. So a minute ago, I mentioned that this first section of our clip should have low energy music. But what does that mean? Well, once again, good old Ben Newhouse comes to our rescue. In his book, he mentions 5 aspects of music that have a significant impact on the overall energy level of the sound. These are tempo, rhythmic subdivision, instrumentation size, harmonic rhythm, and key changes. If we look at each of these, we find that basically the faster your tempo, the higher the energy. The shorter your rhythmic subdivision, or the shorter the notes you actually use, the higher the energy. The more instruments you use, the higher the energy. The more chords you use in a single measure, the higher the energy. And finally, the more frequently you change keys, the higher the energy. So, when we're addressing our 9 parameters of music, we want to make sure that we keep these ideas in mind so that we can match the same general energy level as the visuals for our section. So with that, let's start looking at each of our 9 parameters. First up, we have tempo. How can we use our tempo to help accomplish our tasks for this section? Well, we want lower energy music, so I'm going to say that we want a slower tempo. Somewhere around 60 to 70 beats per minute should probably do well by us. Next, let's look at texture. So by texture, I basically mean the compositional structure. What kinds of layers are we going to be working with? Well, most sad music works with a melody, chords, and sometimes a counter melody. So let's start there. With timbre, we're looking at the types of tone colors and sounds that we want to work with. I'm thinking that we can start mostly with just strings here. Possibly some lower woodwind instruments. That can really help capture the melancholy sound that we're looking for. I'm also going to toy with the idea of using some pitched and or non-pitched metallic percussion, since they're very common in magical and fantasy settings like this one. Next, we want to address register. In this parameter, I like to think of it as 2-part. What register is the melody going to be in? Upper, middle, or lower register? And how many registers do I want to use for each layer of my texture? Right off the bat, I'm thinking that I want my melody to be in the middle register. This will allow me to move up or down into higher or lower territory later in the scene if I want to make a more dramatic statement. I'm going to keep the melody in a single octave at a time, and I don't plan on taking up too much space in my harmony either, probably just keeping them in the low to mid register. Now let's look at our rhythm. Here we want to consider a few things. What meter are we working with? What subdivisions will we focus on? And really any other specific things that come to mind. For the sake of ease, let's say we'll keep to 4/4 time for our meter. For our subdivisions, let's say we'll stick to eighth notes and quarter notes, making up the majority of the melody. These aren't too fast, so the musical energy won't shoot up, but they're not exactly slow either, so they should give us sufficient momentum to write a lyrical melody. Other than that, I'm not thinking of using too much syncopation or triplets, but let's just leave dotted rhythms on the table, just in case. So next up is dynamics, which is pretty self-explanatory. What kind of volume are we looking for? Since I want this to stay in the background, I'm going to go ahead and say we should be working with stuff on the softer and quieter end of the spectrum. We don't want to get too loud or it'll start to compete with our dialogue. Articulation-wise, I'm thinking mostly legato, slurred, stuff like that. We don't want too many short and crisp notes because those are more likely to sound out of place in our emotional setting. Next is pitch, which gets a little more complicated. Pitch basically has to do with our melody. Even though melody consists of both pitch and rhythm, we want to stop and consider what types of pitches are we going to work with. Are they chordal tones, color tones, non-chordal tones? We also want to consider what kind of movement we'll focus on. Is it going to be mostly stepwise and conjunct, or are we going to use more leaps and disjunct movement? There's really a whole lot for us to consider. For now, I'm just going to say that I want to stick with mostly chordal tones, with some passing tones and neighbor tones to give it more personality. Other than that, let's just stick mostly to conjunct movement to help maintain the lyrical nature of our music. Finally, let's consider our harmony. Basically, what kind of key am I looking to work with? Do I want to use any modulations? What about chords? Will this be functional harmony? What kinds of voicings? What will our harmonic rhythm look like, etc., etc.? For this section, I want to use a minor key with maybe some borrowed chords from the parallel Dorian to give it a bit more of an optimistic and mystical feel to the sound. I'll stick to triads and functional harmony, and I won't worry about changing keys at any point in this section. Just to keep things in a lower energy feel. I'll stick to just one chord per measure, and possibly even just one chord per every 2 measures. We'll see how I feel when I'm writing it. But with that, we've got a pretty good description of what we want for this section. The next step is to just repeat these 4 questions for the remaining 3 sections of the clip, addressing how each shift in contour will be met by a similar shift in the music. Alright, so for the sake of time, I went ahead and answered these questions on my own. Let's quickly just take a look at what I came up with. Section 2 is only a few seconds long. The primary motion is one of good-natured anticipation. Danny has spoken up, and we can feel a tangible shift in the mood for the better. We just don't quite understand why yet. The energy level has gone up to around a 3 out of 5. There's still plenty of dialogue going on, so we want to make sure that our music remains in the background. For this, I plan on using soft tone colors, comparatively small instrumentation, and plenty of repetition throughout my music. Finally, let's see what I came up with in my 9 parameters. My tempo is going to pick up a bit from before, closer to the 80 to 90 beats per minute range. Texture-wise, I'm sticking mostly to chords being played in an oom-pa rhythmic structure. Basically, I'm treating this section as a setup or intro to the next one, where I'll introduce the melody. Timbre-wise, I'm still focusing on woodwinds and strings, although I'm using shorter articulations and introducing some more drums and metallic percussion than before. Rhythmically, we're still in 4/4 time, but I'm using a much more prominent oom-pa rhythmic structure and making use of more eighth notes and syncopation. In terms of register, there's no melody, so we're using fewer than before. But here, the harmony is going to be taking up a bit more space in the mid to upper registers. Our dynamics are still quiet, but we're starting to get a little bit louder as the setup for the next section takes place. I already touched on articulations a bit, but we're going to focus on crisper and shorter sounds to try and get some of that plucky, good, bubbly energy sound into our music. Pitch-wise, there won't really be much of a melody yet, so I don't need to worry about this all that much. Finally, we're definitely switching keys for this section, and we're going to go focus on major harmonies. The chords are going to stick mostly to the 1st and 5th, with the bass line doing something similar. I'll also make sure that the harmonic rhythm is equal to 1 chord per measure, because all of these are very common traits for comedic and upbeat themes. Section 3 is where we hit our stride in this scene. The emotions are much happier than previous. Danny is in full swing and trying his best to cheer up Miranda. The energy is at its peak around a 4 out of 5. The dialogue is still in the foreground, so we're going to continue to use the same strategies as before to keep the music in the background. Our 9 parameters are going to basically remain completely identical to the previous section, with just a few adjustments. For example, we're adding a melody to our texture, which will add an additional register to the music, and our pitch is going to use more leaps to help capture the bubbly sense of the scene. We're also going to frequently bounce the melody around different voices, which will have an impact on our timbre. Finally, the last section will come full circle, albeit with a bit of a darker color to it. Our primary emotion is back to gloomy sadness. Although this time there's some ominous foreshadowing involved. The energy level has come back down to about a 2 out of 5. The dialogue is still in the foreground, but this time we'll add sustained textures to our list of strategies for keeping the music in the background. Parameter-wise, our tempo is going to slow back down. The texture is going to shift back to just melody and chords. The timbre is going to be more string-heavy with some heavier emphasis on trills and tremolo to give a greater sense of urgency and suspense to the music. Our registers are going back down, with the melody shifting to a lower register than it was just in. The rhythm is going back to its original slow and slightly less syncopated nature. Our dynamics are going to quiet down a bit, although they will raise up just near the end for extra dramatic weight. Articulation-wise, we're going to go back to a more legato and sustained pitch. Pitch-wise, it's back to the conjunct movement from the beginning. And finally, in our harmony, we are definitely switching back to a minor key with much darker chord choices. So, look at what we got. After answering these questions and sticking true to the process, we have a fully functioning and highly detailed map that not only tells us what we need to do with our music, but how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And that's pretty awesome. If done properly, this process can practically obliterate writer's block. Now, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but it is a very strong tool to have. So you're not just stuck in front of a keyboard or with a guitar trying to force yourself to come up with something out of thin air. At the very least, you have a very strong idea of what you're working with and a reliable way for coming out strong at the beginning of a project. I mean, let's take a look at a rough sketch that I was able to write in less than 2 hours using this map. Alright, so here is a rough sketch that I was able to put together in practically no time at all because I spent so much time mapping out my ideas beforehand. Everything stays pretty faithful to the original ideas that I came up with, but the one exception is that you may notice I didn't have time to add any percussion, which was a bummer, but I think it works well enough without it. So with that, let's give this a quick listen to. Pull up the video.
I know, Mom. Yeah, no, I'm fine. Really, I'm good. This is all part of the process, you know? It just takes 99 no's to get one yes. They said the same thing that they always say. Thanks, but no thanks. You know, kids' books these days have to be more cynical, darker. Yeah. Thanks, Mom.
Miranda! Bullseye! What do you mean darker?
Danny, I think we just have to face facts. Yang is out and Yang is in.
Yeah, but the wild ones aren't dark. They're just not like that.
Well, maybe they need to be.
What it needs is a good old-fashioned Wild West shootout, or a swashbuckling adventure on the high seas. Wait, or a voyage to the far reaches of space.
I write the words. You're the pictures, remember?
The Wild Bunch aren't gonna like this.
And that's it. Like I said, this was just a quick draft. If I really wanted to, I could always spend more time working on this scene to get it exactly how I want it to sound. But the main idea here is just to show how useful the spotting process was in putting all of this together. And with that, we've reached the end of this long video. I hope you found it useful and that you're excited to try this process out yourself. If you're participating in the Spitfire competition, please tag me in your post. I would love to see what you guys are coming up with. A quick shout out goes to my amazing patrons for their much appreciated support of this channel. I can't express how grateful I am to each and every one of you. The same goes out to each of you who are watching this video now. I appreciate the love and support that you guys are showing to this channel, and your wonderful comments and messages just mean the world to me. If you'd like to help make this channel grow, please share this video on social media, in online forums, with family, friends, just anywhere you think it would be helpful and appreciated. So with that, keep studying, keep working hard, and as always, keep writing new music.